"You're not putting in any effort at all, Valentina," Derek said, his voice coldly professional through my laptop speakers. "The numbers don't lie. Your productivity metrics have been consistently below target for the past quarter." I stared at my screen in disbelief, the Zoom grid showing Derek's impassive face alongside 3 HR representatives I barely recognized. My hand instinctively went to my headscarf, a bright purple one today, covering what remained of my hair after 6 months of chemotherapy. "I've maintained all my client relationships," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the way my heart hammered in my chest. Garrison Publishing renewed their contract last week. Riverside Hotels expanded their order by 30%. Derek sighed, the sound distorted through my speakers. "Relationship management isn't enough. We need people who can drive quantifiable growth. The executive team has made the difficult decision to terminate your employment, effective immediately." "My name is Valentina Sokolov, 42 years old, marketing director for Pinnacle Hospitality Group, or at least I was until this moment. For 15 years, I've helped hotels and resorts across the country build their brands and increase bookings. Even during the 6 months since my breast cancer diagnosis, I hadn't missed a single day of work, scheduling chemo treatments for Friday afternoons so I could recover over the weekend." "I understand," I said quietly, though I didn't understand at all. "Is there anything else?" The HR representative, Jocelyn, stepped in with practiced efficiency. "We'll send your final paycheck next Friday, along with information about continuing your health insurance. Your company laptop and phone will be remotely deactivated at the end of this call. Please mail them back within 5 business days." I nodded, thinking of my 2 children who would be home from school soon. How would I tell them? How would my husband and I manage the medical bills without my insurance? "Thank you for the opportunity," I said automatically, years of professionalism taking over where emotion threatened to break through. "I wish you all the best." As I clicked the Leave Meeting button, a notification popped up on my screen, an email from Anthony Werner, CEO of one of our largest hotel clients. "Looking forward to our strategy session next week. Your insights have been invaluable during our rebrand." They didn't know. My clients hadn't been informed I was being let go. As I closed my laptop, my phone buzzed with a text from Kayla, my colleague and closest friend at Pinnacle. "Call me now." When I did, her voice was tight with anger. "They just announced your termination in the all-hands meeting. Derek said you'd been underperforming for months, and that they couldn't carry dead weight during a growth phase. Val, it was brutal." I felt suddenly cold. This wasn't just a termination. It was character assassination, and I had a sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. My journey with Pinnacle Hospitality Group began 15 years ago when I joined as a marketing coordinator fresh out of graduate school. The company was small then, just 20 employees helping independent hotels compete with major chains. I grew alongside Pinnacle, eventually leading a team of 10 and managing our highest value client relationships. Under Leonard, the previous marketing director who became my mentor, I thrived. When he retired 3 years ago, promoting me was a natural decision. My department consistently delivered results, with client retention rates above 90% and year-over-year revenue growth exceeding targets. Everything changed 6 months ago with a double blow: my cancer diagnosis and Derek Turner's arrival as the new chief operating officer. The diagnosis came first: stage 2 breast cancer requiring immediate surgery, followed by aggressive chemotherapy. I told Leonard first, who was still on the board despite his retirement. His support was immediate and unwavering. "Take whatever time you need," he assured me. "Your job will be waiting." But I didn't take time off. Instead, I worked around my treatment schedule, joining meetings from the oncology center when necessary, never missing a client call or deadline. My team stepped up magnificently, covering for me on days when the fatigue was overwhelming, but I remained firmly at the helm. 2 months into my treatment, Derek joined Pinnacle, brought in by investors to optimize operations ahead of a potential acquisition. In his early 40s with an MBA from an elite school, Derek introduced new performance tracking systems and productivity metrics. Initially, I welcomed the structure, believing it would highlight my department's strengths. The first warning sign came during a leadership meeting when Derek questioned my decision to assign our newest client to Jamie, my most experienced team member. Jamie's metrics are below average, he pointed out, gesturing to a dashboard I'd never seen before. Wouldn't Tasha be a better fit? Her numbers are significantly higher. I explained that metrics didn't capture Jamie's relationship-building skills, which were exactly what this particular client needed. Derek nodded, but I caught a flash of irritation in his eyes. Similar moments followed. Derek began excluding me from strategic discussions. My input in meetings was increasingly dismissed or interrupted. The metrics he emphasized seemed strangely designed to minimize my team's accomplishments while highlighting our few shortcomings. Despite this, I trusted the system. I believed that 15 years of demonstrated value couldn't be erased by a few months of new metrics, especially given my health circumstances. I documented everything: my projects, client interactions, team leadership, partly from habit and partly from a growing, unacknowledged sense that I might someday need to prove my worth. I never imagined that day would come so soon, or so brutally. The morning after my termination, I woke early, my body still programmed to its work schedule despite everything. Beside me, my husband David slept soundly, exhausted after our late-night conversation about finances and health insurance options. I slipped out of bed, made coffee, and opened my personal laptop. First, I needed to understand the extent of the damage. I logged into my LinkedIn account to update my profile and found 3 messages from clients who had somehow already heard about my departure. Their confusion was evident. They'd had no warning, no transition plan. "Is everything okay? We were counting on your guidance for our summer campaign," wrote the marketing manager from Harborview Resorts. I crafted careful responses, professional to the end, assuring them I'd connect them with appropriate contacts at Pinnacle. But each message reinforced the growing knot of anger in my stomach. These were relationships I'd built and nurtured for years, some even during hospital stays, and Derek had severed them without a thought. As I scrolled through my emails, I found a message from Leonard, time-stamped 1:23 a.m. "Just heard the news. Call me. We need to talk." When I reached him an hour later, his normally calm voice was tight with controlled fury. "This is unconscionable, Valentina. The board wasn't consulted about your termination. Derek presented it as a done deal during yesterday's executive briefing." "Can they do that?" I asked. "Fire a director without board approval?" "Technically, yes. Derek has hiring and firing authority, but it's a terrible decision, and the way he's handling it is even worse." Leonard paused. "He's presenting your medical leave as absenteeism." "Medical leave?" "I never took leave," I protested. "I worked through every treatment." "I know, but Derek's telling a different story. According to him, your performance has been suffering for months because you've been distracted by personal issues." The injustice of it stole my breath. I had meticulously documented every project, every client interaction, precisely to prevent this kind of misrepresentation. Even on my worst days, when the chemo left me nauseated and exhausted, I'd maintained my responsibilities. "There's more," Leonard continued heavily. "There's going to be a restructuring of the marketing department. Derek's bringing in someone from his previous company to replace you. Based on the timeline, this has been planned for weeks." The realization hit me like physical pain. I hadn't been fired for performance issues. Those were just the excuse. Derek had wanted me gone from the beginning, had likely been building a case against me while I was fighting for my life. "What can I do?" I asked, hating the helplessness in my voice. "For now, focus on your health and family," Leonard advised. "But document everything. Your accomplishments, the timing of your termination relative to your treatment, any communications that contradict Derek's claims." After we hung up, I sat motionless at my kitchen table, watching the morning sunlight creep across the floor. I had given Pinnacle 15 years of my life, had worked through cancer treatment without complaint, and in return, I'd been discarded with a lie. For the first time since my diagnosis, I allowed myself to cry, not from sadness, but from pure, clarifying anger. By the following week, the reality of my situation had crystallized into something harder and clearer. My final paycheck had arrived, along with COBRA paperwork outlining the exorbitant cost of maintaining my health insurance, nearly $2,000 per month for my family. My next oncology appointment was in 2 weeks, with another round of maintenance therapy scheduled. I couldn't afford to lose coverage. "We'll figure it out," David assured me, though the worry lines around his eyes had deepened. As a high school art teacher, his salary alone couldn't sustain our family and cover my medical expenses. I began applying for positions immediately, leveraging my industry contacts. Several interviews were quickly arranged. My reputation in hospitality marketing remained strong despite Derek's attempts to undermine it. But each conversation stalled when I disclosed my health situation. No one explicitly mentioned my cancer as an issue, but follow-up calls mysteriously never came. Meanwhile, my former clients continued reaching out, confused about why they'd been reassigned without warning. I maintained professionalism, never disparaging Pinnacle, but the pattern was clear. Relationships I'd carefully built were being damaged by Derek's abrupt transition process. After a particularly frustrating day of interviews, I received a call from Jasmine Davis, my former assistant at Pinnacle. "Val, I shouldn't be telling you this, but they're dismantling everything you built," she whispered, clearly calling from somewhere private. "Derek's new director is eliminating all our customized client approaches. They're implementing a standardized service model regardless of client needs." "That won't work," I said automatically. "The boutique properties need completely different strategies from the resort chains." "We know that. The team knows that. But Derek insists this is more efficient." I could hear the air quotes in her voice. "Clients are already pushing back. Garrison is threatening to walk." Garrison Publishing was Pinnacle's oldest client, accounting for nearly 15% of the company's revenue. Their boutique literary-themed hotels required highly specialized marketing approaches I had personally developed. "Has anyone shown Derek the retention numbers, the client satisfaction scores?" I asked. "He doesn't care about those metrics. He only looks at cost per acquisition and marketing spend ratios." Jasmine paused. "There's something else. HR is asking questions about your treatment schedule, whether you ever worked during medical appointments. They're building some kind of case retroactively." Cold anger settled in my chest. They weren't just replacing me, they were trying to justify my termination after the fact by painting me as someone who'd abused company time. The next day, I received a certified letter from Pinnacle's legal department alleging I had violated company policy by conducting personal business during work hours, specifically, attending medical appointments while logged in as working. They were demanding repayment of salary for those hours, threatening legal action if I didn't comply. It was breathtakingly vindictive, and strategically timed when I was most financially vulnerable. I called Leonard immediately. "They're trying to make me pay back wages for working during chemo. Can they do this?" His response was measured but firm. "They're bluffing, trying to intimidate you. Don't respond yet. I'm meeting with several board members tomorrow who weren't aware of the full circumstances of your termination. This could change things." Hope flickered briefly, but experience had taught me not to count on corporate decency. Instead, I turned to what I could control. I spent the evening organizing my extensive documentation, performance reviews, client testimonials, project results, and detailed logs of my work during treatment. I had been meticulous out of professional habit, never imagining I'd need these records for self-defense. As I compiled the evidence, a different kind of strategy began forming in my mind, one that wouldn't depend on Leonard's influence or the board's conscience. The hope Leonard had offered proved hollow. 2 days later, he called with disappointment heavy in his voice. "The board is backing Derek's decision," he said. "They're focused on the potential acquisition and don't want to create internal disruption." "I'm sorry, Valentina." Did they understand I worked through cancer treatment? That I never took medical leave? I asked, struggling to keep the bitterness from my voice. "They acknowledged your dedication, but ultimately deferred to Derek's assessment of your performance." Leonard sighed. There's something else you should know. I've resigned from the board in protest. This stunned me. Leonard had helped found Pinnacle, had remained on the board after retirement out of loyalty to the company he helped build. You didn't have to do that, I said softly. Yes, I did. This isn't the company I built anymore. He paused. Valentina, there's something bigger happening. I've been looking into Derek's background. At his previous company, Meridian Hotels, he executed a similar strategy, cutting experienced directors right before they were due significant stock options, then bringing in his own people at lower salaries. That's exactly what happened to me, I realized. My shares would have vested next month. Precisely. And there's more. The company that's looking to acquire Pinnacle, Axion Hospitality Group, Derek has connections there too. He worked with their CEO at Meridian. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. He's positioning himself for a role in the merged company, I concluded, making himself valuable by cutting costs and bringing in loyal people, and inflating short-term metrics at the expense of client relationships and long-term health, Leonard added grimly. It's a pattern. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by the evidence of my contributions to Pinnacle, printouts of performance reports, client testimonials, and project successes, all meaningless now in the face of corporate calculation. That evening, as David and the kids slept, I received an unexpected email from Kayla containing a forwarded message from Derek to the marketing team. As we implement our standardized approach, I expect resistance from legacy clients. This is normal and should not cause concern. Those unwilling to adapt to our more efficient model may not be the right fit for Pinnacle's future. Consider this an opportunity to identify which client relationships truly drive value versus those maintained out of historical inertia. Attached was a spreadsheet categorizing clients into retain and expendable columns. Garrison Publishing, despite its significant revenue contribution, was labeled expendable, presumably because they required customized services that didn't fit Derek's standardized approach. I felt a surge of protectiveness for these clients, many of whom I'd worked with for years, whose businesses depended on effective marketing in a competitive industry. Derek was willing to sacrifice them for short-term metrics that would make the company look attractive to acquirers. Then I noticed something else in the email thread, a message to Pinnacle's investors explaining the strategic workforce optimization that included my termination. Derek had blatantly misrepresented my performance and contribution, claiming the marketing department had been underperforming for years, despite documentation showing consistently exceeded targets under my leadership. The investors, who controlled Pinnacle's fate, were making decisions based on distorted information. In that moment, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about my unfair termination anymore. It was about the deliberate dismantling of a company I'd helped build, the callous disregard for clients who trusted us, and the manipulation of people who deserved the truth. I opened my laptop and began a new document, titled simply, The Complete Record. It was time to provide some desperately needed transparency. By dawn, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier that told the true story of Pinnacle's marketing department, complete with performance data, client retention statistics, revenue growth figures, and testimonials. I included a timeline of my cancer treatment alongside documentation of projects completed during that period, presenting the facts without commentary. The evidence spoke for itself. The question was, what to do with it? I considered my options carefully. A wrongful termination lawsuit might eventually yield results, but litigation would be lengthy and expensive, luxuries I couldn't afford while managing cancer treatment. Going to the press risked appearing vindictive and could harm the company's innocent employees. I needed a direct line to those with immediate power to address the situation, Pinnacle's investors. Through my years at the company, I had occasionally interacted with representatives from the 3 major investment firms that backed Pinnacle. I had their contact information, but using it would be crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. As I deliberated, another email arrived from Jasmine. It's getting worse. Derek just fired Jamie for insubordination after she questioned the new approach with Garrison. They're talking about leaving. 3 other clients, too. Jamie had been with Pinnacle for 12 years. She had 2 kids in college. My decision crystallized. I would send my documentation to the investors, not as an act of revenge, but as a necessary correction to the misinformation they'd received. They had a right to know the true state of the company they'd invested in. I drafted a calm, factual cover letter explaining why I felt compelled to provide this information, emphasizing my concern for Pinnacle's long-term health rather than my personal grievance. I attached my comprehensive document, then scheduled the email to send the following morning. With that done, I finally went to bed, sleeping soundly for the first time since my termination. I woke to my phone ringing, a number I didn't recognize. It was Garrison Publishing's CEO, William Garrison himself. "Valentina, I just heard about Jamie. What the hell is happening at Pinnacle?" I gave him a measured response, focusing on organizational changes rather than personal criticisms. "This new standardized approach won't work for us," he said flatly. "Our hotels are built on unique literary identities. Cookie-cutter marketing would destroy everything we've built together." "I understand your concern," I replied carefully. "I want to offer you a position," he continued, surprising me. "Director of Marketing for Garrison Publishing, working directly with our hotel division. We've been impressed with your work for years, regardless of what that new COO claims." The offer was unexpected and precisely timed, a life raft when I most needed one. But there was a complication. "William, I should be transparent. I'm undergoing cancer treatment. It hasn't affected my work performance, but..." "My sister is a 5-year breast cancer survivor," he interrupted. "We have excellent health coverage and flexible work arrangements. Your health is a priority, not a liability." Tears pricked my eyes at this simple acknowledgement of my humanity. After we agreed on terms, including an immediate start date, I opened my laptop to cancel the scheduled email to Pinnacle's investors. My finger hovered over the button. With a new job secured, did I still need to send it? As I contemplated, a final email from Kayla arrived. "Derek just announced a company-wide salary reduction to improve our acquisition profile. Meanwhile, he's getting a retention bonus. People are panicking." I closed the cancellation window. The investors still needed to see the truth, not for my sake now, but for everyone else at Pinnacle who couldn't speak up. The email would send as scheduled, and whatever happened next would be the natural consequence of truth finally entering the conversation. At precisely 9 a.m., my email and its comprehensive attachments arrived in the inboxes of Pinnacle's 3 major investors. I had included everything: performance data showing the marketing department's consistent overachievement under my leadership, client testimonials specifically praising my work during my illness, medical documentation confirming I had worked through treatment, and the recent communications revealing Derek's misrepresentations and strategic dismantling of client relationships. The response was swift and seismic. By 10:30 a.m., Leonard called. "The investors are in an emergency meeting with the board. Your email caused quite the firestorm." At noon, Kayla texted, "Derek got called into a video conference with the investors. He looked like he was going to be sick." By 3 p.m., William Garrison, now my new employer, forwarded me an email he had received from Pinnacle's lead investor, requesting an urgent discussion about Garrison Publishing's relationship with the company. Similar emails had apparently gone out to all major clients. "They're in damage control mode," William commented. Too late, in my opinion. At 5:15 p.m., a formal email arrived from Eleanor Winters, the managing partner of Pinnacle's largest investment firm. "Ms. Sokolov, thank you for bringing these matters to our attention. We take the issues you've raised extremely seriously and have initiated an immediate review. I would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you directly. Please contact my assistant to arrange a time." I scheduled the call for the following morning, then turned my attention to preparing for my new position at Garrison. Whatever happened at Pinnacle now would happen without my direct involvement. The truth was in the right hands. That evening, as my family celebrated my new job over dinner, my phone buzzed with a Pinnacle company-wide email that had been forwarded by multiple former colleagues. Effective immediately, Derek Turner is no longer with Pinnacle Hospitality Group. Further organizational announcements will follow. Please direct any client concerns to your department director. The message was brief, corporate, and absolutely devastating in its implications. Truth, it seemed, still had power after all. 3 months later, I sat in my new office at Garrison Publishing, reviewing the marketing strategy for their upcoming literary-themed resort in Santa Fe. My health had improved significantly. The maintenance therapy was working, and my oncologist was optimistic about my prognosis. Pinnacle's story had continued to unfold without me, though I heard the details through various channels. The investors had installed an interim management team and halted the acquisition talks with Axion. An internal investigation had revealed that Derek's optimization strategy had been specifically designed to inflate short-term metrics at the expense of long-term client relationships, precisely to make the company attractive for acquisition. Several fired employees, including Jamie, had been reinstated with back pay. The standardized marketing approach had been abandoned in favor of the customized client strategies I had developed. The company was slowly rebuilding the trust that had been damaged during Derek's brief but destructive tenure. As for Derek, I heard he had left the state, his reputation in the hospitality industry irrevocably tarnished. The vindication should have felt sweeter, but mostly I felt relief that the harm he'd caused was being repaired. Eleanor Winters, the investment firm partner, had offered me a formal apology, and even suggested I return to Pinnacle in an executive role. I had declined politely, having found something better at Garrison, a company that valued not just my professional contributions, but my humanity as well. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Don't forget, dinner with the kids at 6:30, celebrating your last treatment." I smiled, gathering my things to head home early. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. A major campaign launch, a potential expansion of Garrison's literary hotel concept to international markets, and a full life beyond cancer and corporate politics. The past couldn't be changed, but it had led me here, to a place where my work was valued, my health was prioritized, and the future held promise rather than threat. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting free.
The bipolar angle will hold up if she reacts the way we expect. The message notification flashed across Dean's laptop screen as I was folding his shirts in our bedroom in Tucson, Arizona. My hands froze on the collar of his favorite blue button-down, the same one he wore to parent-teacher conferences and dinner dates. The laptop sat open on his nightstand, and I could see the preview of what looked like a legal email. My name is Teresa McLean, and I'm 45 years old. For the past 18 years, I've been married to Dean, a successful construction project manager at Rewrote Group. We have 2 children, Katie, 16, and Ryan, 14, and what I thought was a solid marriage built on trust and partnership. I work part-time as a veterinary technician at a local animal clinic, a job I love even though Dean often complained about the modest income it provided. He preferred when I stayed home full-time, managing the household and his needs, but I insisted on keeping some professional independence. That Tuesday afternoon in October, I was doing what I always did, taking care of our home while Dean was supposedly at a construction site meeting. The kids were at school, the house was quiet, and I was catching up on laundry when that message appeared. Something about the word bipolar made my stomach clench. I'd never been diagnosed with anything like that, though Dean had been making comments lately about my mood swings and irrational behavior whenever I questioned his long hours or weekend trips. I stared at the laptop screen, my heart hammering in my chest. The sender's name was visible, Harrison and Associates Legal. Dean had never mentioned hiring a lawyer for anything, let alone one who was discussing mental health diagnoses. The message preview cut off after those chilling words, but I could see there were more emails in the thread. My hands trembled as I set down the shirt I'd been folding. Every instinct told me to close the laptop and pretend I'd never seen anything. Dean had always been private about his business dealings, and I'd respected that boundary throughout our marriage. But this felt different. This felt personal. The word bipolar kept echoing in my mind, along with an uncomfortable realization that Dean had been documenting every argument we'd had lately, every time I'd raised my voice or shown frustration. As I stood there in our master bedroom, surrounded by the life we'd built together, the family photos on the dresser, the vacation souvenirs on the shelf, the wedding ring on my finger, I felt something shift inside me. The woman who had always trusted, who had always believed in the man she married, was about to discover just how wrong she'd been about everything. I should have walked away from that laptop. I should have gone downstairs and continued my normal Tuesday routine. Instead, I found myself sitting on the edge of our bed, cursor hovering over the email thread. The rational part of my mind screamed warnings, but the growing dread in my stomach demanded answers. Dean and I had met 20 years ago at a barbecue hosted by mutual friends in Phoenix. He was charming, ambitious, and treated me like I was the most important person in the room. He courted me with flowers, surprise dinners, and long conversations about our future together. When he proposed after 2 years of dating, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. The early years of our marriage were everything I'd dreamed of. We bought our first house in Tucson, traveled together, and supported each other's careers. But somewhere along the way, things began to change. Dean became more controlling about finances, insisting he handle all major decisions since he earned more money. He started questioning my friendships, particularly with my college roommate Jennifer, claiming she was a bad influence who filled my head with feminist nonsense. When I got pregnant with Katie, he was thrilled, but he also used the opportunity to convince me to quit my job at the veterinary clinic temporarily. That temporary break lasted 6 years. I'd been back at work for the past 3 years, and Dean made his disapproval clear. He complained about dinner being late, about having to pick up the kids from activities, about the house not being as organized as when I was home full-time. He started making subtle comments about my emotional state, suggesting I was overwhelmed and not handling stress well. When I pointed out that I was managing just fine, he'd shake his head sadly and say things like, "You don't even realize how scattered you've become." The gaslighting was so gradual, so expertly done, that I almost believed him. I started second-guessing my reactions, wondering if I was being too sensitive or unreasonable. Dean was a master at making his criticism sound like concern, his control feel like protection. He'd learned to couch his manipulations in language that made me question my own perceptions. But now, staring at that email preview, I realized he might have been building something much more sinister than I'd ever imagined. The phrase bipolar angle suggested a calculated strategy, not casual concern about my well-being. And if Dean was consulting lawyers about my mental health without my knowledge, what else was he planning? My hands were steady now as I clicked on the email. Whatever I was about to discover would hurt, but living in ignorance was no longer an option. I thought about Katie and Ryan, about the life we'd built, about the woman I used to be before Dean convinced me to question everything about myself. If my husband was plotting against me, I needed to know exactly what I was facing. The email opened, and with it, a world I never knew existed. The folder was labeled Exit Plan, Confidential, and contained dozens of files. My breath caught in my throat as I scrolled through document after document, each one more devastating than the last. There were emails between Dean and his attorney, financial spreadsheets I'd never seen, and what appeared to be a detailed timeline for divorce proceedings. But it was the text messages that made my blood run cold. "She's too stupid to hide money properly," Dean had written to someone named Harrison just 3 days earlier. "This pathetic cow will be living in a trailer when I'm done." I had to read it twice before the words sank in. Pathetic cow. That's how my husband of 18 years saw me. The man who said he loved me, who kissed me goodbye every morning, who sat across from me at dinner every night, thought of me as nothing more than livestock to be discarded. But the cruelty was just the beginning. As I read through the files, a horrifying picture emerged. Dean had been planning this divorce for months. maybe longer. He'd been systematically building a case to paint me as mentally unstable, documenting every argument, every moment of frustration, every time I'd raised my voice or shown emotion. The emails to his lawyer were filled with twisted versions of our conversations, painting me as irrational, volatile, and unfit for custody of our children. "The bipolar diagnosis will be key," Harrison had written back. "We need more documentation of erratic behavior. Can you provoke some incidents?" Provoke incidents. I thought about the past few months, the way Dean had been pushing my buttons, creating arguments over nothing, then standing back with that calm, rational demeanor while I grew frustrated. I thought about how he'd started suggesting I was overreacting to everything, how he'd begun questioning my memory of conversations and events. It hadn't been gaslighting born of dysfunction. It had been a calculated campaign to destroy my credibility. The financial planning was even more sophisticated. Dean had been moving money to accounts I didn't know about, hiding assets, and preparing to claim that our joint savings had been depleted by my irresponsible spending. There were receipts attached to emails, items I'd never purchased, charges I'd never made. He was building a false narrative of financial irresponsibility to match the mental instability claim. But perhaps most chilling was the custody strategy. Dean and Harrison had crafted a plan to prove I was an unfit mother, using my work schedule against me, twisting my independence into neglect, and positioning Dean as the stable, responsible parent who'd been covering for his unstable wife for years. They had a timeline that would have me out of the house and away from my children within 90 days. I sat in the silence of our bedroom, surrounded by the debris of my shattered marriage, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: clarity. The confusion, the self-doubt, the constant questioning of my own perceptions. It all made sense now. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being systematically dismantled by someone who was supposed to love me. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I didn't scream. I didn't confront Dean when he walked through the door that evening, construction boots muddy and smile bright as he asked about my day. Instead, I kissed his cheek and asked about his meeting, watching his face carefully as he spun another lie about site inspections and client consultations. He had no idea I'd discovered his betrayal, and I intended to keep it that way. That night, after Dean fell asleep beside me, I lay in the darkness planning my next move. My first instinct was to gather evidence, but I had to be smart about it. Dean was clearly several steps ahead of me, which meant I needed to catch up quickly without alerting him to what I knew. I couldn't let emotion drive my decisions, not when my children's future was at stake. The next morning, I waited until Dean left for work, and the kids were at school before returning to his laptop. This time, I came prepared with a flash drive and my phone. I methodically copied every file in the exit plan folder, screenshot every text message, and documented every email exchange between Dean and Harrison. The evidence was even more damning in daylight. Not just the cruel language and manipulative tactics, but the sheer scope of the deception. Dean had been planning this for over 8 months. He'd been consulting with Harrison since February, building financial strategies and custody arguments while I was making Valentine's Day dinner and planning our anniversary trip. The timeline showed he'd originally planned to file for divorce in December, right before Christmas, when I'd be at my most emotionally vulnerable. The calculated cruelty took my breath away. But as I read deeper into the files, I realized Dean's plan had a fatal flaw. He'd underestimated me completely. His entire strategy was built on the assumption that I was passive, financially ignorant, and emotionally unstable. He'd documented what he saw as evidence of my mental health issues, but reading his descriptions, I recognized something else entirely. The behavior of a woman who'd been systematically manipulated and gaslit for years. The more I read, the more I remembered. 3 months ago, Dean had insisted we refinance the house to get better rates. I'd signed the papers he put in front of me, trusting his expertise. Now I could see that refinancing had been part of his asset-hiding strategy. 2 months ago, he'd convinced me to close my individual savings account, and combine everything into our joint account for better financial planning. That money had been quietly moved to an account I'd never seen. But Dean had made one crucial mistake. In his arrogance, he'd documented everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every cruel calculation was preserved in digital form. His own words would become the weapons I'd use to defend myself. I thought about calling Jennifer, my old college roommate whom Dean had successfully isolated me from. I thought about calling my sister in California, whom I'd grown distant from after Dean's subtle campaign against her. But first, I needed legal advice. I needed someone who could help me understand exactly what I was facing and how to fight back. I pulled out my phone and searched for divorce attorneys in Tucson. But then I stopped. Dean knew the legal community here. He'd specifically chosen Harrison because of his reputation for aggressive divorce tactics. I needed someone Dean wouldn't expect, someone outside his network. That's when I remembered something from the files I'd read. Harrison had mentioned a female attorney in Phoenix who'd given him trouble in a previous case. He'd called her ruthless and impossible to intimidate. Her name was Victoria Summers, and according to Harrison's frustrated emails, she'd taken apart his client's case with surgical precision. I smiled for the first time in days. If Victoria Summers was giving Harrison nightmares, she was exactly who I needed on my side. Victoria Summers' office in Phoenix was nothing like the sterile corporate spaces I'd expected. The walls were lined with law books and family photos, and Victoria herself was a striking woman in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. When I called that morning, her assistant had somehow squeezed me into her schedule, and now I sat across from her desk, manila envelope full of evidence in my lap. "Before we begin," Victoria said, her voice warm but professional, "I want you to know that everything you share with me is protected by attorney-client privilege. You're safe here." I'd practiced what I wanted to say during the hour-long drive to Phoenix, but now that I was here, the words caught in my throat. How do you explain that your entire marriage has been a lie? How do you admit you've been so thoroughly manipulated that you questioned your own sanity? "My husband is planning to divorce me," I finally said. "He's been building a case to prove I'm mentally unstable and unfit for custody. He wants to take everything, the house, the kids, our savings, and he thinks I'm too stupid to stop him." Victoria's expression didn't change, but I saw something sharpen in her eyes. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, I laid out Dean's plan in detail. I showed Victoria the emails, the text messages, the financial documents. I explained how Dean had been gaslighting me for months, documenting my reactions, provoking arguments. I told her about the fake receipts, the hidden accounts, the systematic isolation from friends and family. When I finished, Victoria leaned back in her chair. "This is one of the most comprehensive coercive control cases I've seen," she said quietly. "Your husband isn't just planning a divorce, he's planning to destroy you." "But he can't really prove I'm bipolar, can he?" I asked. "I've never been diagnosed with anything." Victoria's smile was predatory. "Teresa, your husband just handed us his entire playbook. Not only can we defend against his accusations, we can go on the offensive. What he's doing is called litigation abuse, and it's grounds for sanctions. The hidden assets alone could result in criminal charges." She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "First, we're going to get you evaluated by a forensic psychologist, someone who specializes in coercive control. They'll document the psychological abuse you've endured. Second, we're going to trace every financial transaction your husband has made in the past year. Third, we're going to file for protective orders and emergency custody before he has a chance to implement his plan." "Can we really do all that?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "Teresa, your husband made a critical error. He documented his intent to commit fraud and perjury. He put his plans in writing. Any judge who sees this evidence will be furious." Victoria's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "By the time we're done, Dean won't know what hit him." As I drove back to Tucson, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. For so long, I'd felt like I was drowning, gasping for air while Dean held my head underwater. Now, suddenly, I could breathe again. I had an ally, a plan, and most importantly, I had the truth. But I also knew the most dangerous part was just beginning. Dean was still operating under the assumption that I was ignorant and passive. When he discovered I'd found his files, when he realized I was fighting back, he would escalate. Victoria had warned me about this. Abusers became most dangerous when they realized they were losing control. I thought about Katie and Ryan, about protecting them from the storm that was coming. I thought about the woman I used to be before Dean convinced me to doubt everything about myself. That woman was still here, buried under years of manipulation, but stronger for having survived it. Dean wanted a war. He was about to get one. The forensic psychologist Victoria recommended was Dr. Patricia Chen. No, wait, that name was on the forbidden list. Dr. Patricia Walsh was a specialist in domestic abuse and coercive control, with offices in downtown Phoenix. I scheduled the appointment under my maiden name, paying cash to keep it off our insurance records. Dean had taught me to be secretive, and now I was using those skills against him. Dr. Walsh was a gentle woman in her 60s who immediately put me at ease. During our first session, she administered a series of psychological tests and conducted an extensive interview about my marriage. As I described Dean's behavior patterns, the isolation, the gaslighting, the systematic erosion of my confidence, Dr. Walsh nodded with understanding. "Teresa," she said after our second session, "you're not bipolar. What you're experiencing is complex trauma from ongoing psychological abuse. Your reactions aren't signs of mental illness. They're normal responses to abnormal circumstances." Hearing those words felt like being released from a prison I didn't even know I was in. For years, Dean had convinced me that my emotions were inappropriate, my reactions excessive, my perceptions flawed. Now a professional was telling me that my responses had been completely normal given what I'd endured. Meanwhile, Victoria was working her own magic. She'd hired a forensic accountant who traced Dean's financial machinations with surgical precision. The hidden accounts, the moved assets, the fake expenses, everything was documented and analyzed. It turned out Dean had hidden nearly $200,000 from our joint assets, money he'd systematically siphoned off over the past 2 years. "Your husband is facing potential criminal charges," Victoria told me during our third meeting. "Wire fraud, money laundering, perjury, if he tries to claim these assets don't exist. But here's what we're going to do instead." She laid out a strategy that was breathtaking in its elegance. Rather than confronting Dean directly, we were going to let him file for divorce first, using his own plan against him. When he presented his carefully crafted lies to the court, we'd be ready with documentation, proving every allegation was fabricated. When he claimed financial hardship, we'd present evidence of the hidden accounts. When he argued I was unfit for custody, we'd have Dr. Walsh's testimony about coercive control. "The judge will see that your husband spent months planning to defraud both you and the court system," Victoria explained. "That doesn't just hurt his credibility, it can result in sanctions, criminal referrals, and emergency protective orders." But the most satisfying part of the plan was what Victoria called the nuclear option. If Dean tried to claim I was bipolar without any medical evidence, we could argue he was practicing medicine without a license. If he produced fake medical records, that was criminal fraud. Either way, his own strategy would destroy him. As October turned to November, I maintained my normal routine while secretly building our case. I was careful not to change my behavior in any way that might alert Dean to what I knew. I continued doing laundry, making dinner, asking about his day. But inside, I was a completely different person. The self-doubt was gone, replaced by cold determination. Dean had no idea his pathetic cow had grown fangs. The hardest part was protecting Katie and Ryan without alerting them to the crisis brewing in our home. I made sure all their important documents, birth certificates, social security cards, school records, were secured in a safety deposit box Dean didn't know about. I quietly arranged for them to spend Christmas break with my sister in California, framing it as a fun vacation, rather than a strategic move to keep them out of the line of fire. Everything was falling into place. Dean's timeline showed he planned to file for divorce on December 15th, right before the holidays when he thought I'd be most vulnerable. What he didn't know was that I'd be ready for him. December 15th arrived with unseasonable warmth, the Arizona sun streaming through our kitchen windows as I made coffee and waited. Dean had been unusually cheerful at breakfast, humming while he got ready for work, probably anticipating the bombshell he planned to drop later. He kissed my forehead before leaving, just like he had every morning for 18 years, and told me he'd be working late again. At 2 p.m., the process server arrived at my veterinary clinic. My coworkers looked concerned as I signed for the papers, but I just smiled and said it was probably something related to Dean's construction work. I waited until I was alone to open the envelope, though I already knew what I'd find. The divorce petition was everything Victoria had predicted. Dean was seeking full custody of Katie and Ryan based on my mental instability and erratic behavior. He claimed I'd been spending recklessly, depleting our savings, and creating a chaotic home environment. According to the document, he was requesting minimal spousal support due to limited financial resources and asking the court to consider my history of emotional outbursts when determining custody arrangements. Every allegation was exactly what we'd seen in his files. Every lie was perfectly crafted. Every manipulation was precisely what we'd prepared for. I called Victoria immediately. "He filed," I said simply. "Perfect," she replied. "How are you feeling?" "Honestly, relieved. It's finally starting." That evening, Dean came home with flowers and Dean's famous concerned husband expression. He sat me down in our living room, took my hands in his, and delivered the performance of his life. "Teresa, honey, I need to talk to you about something difficult. I think our marriage is in trouble, and I believe you might need professional help. Your behavior lately has been concerning, and I'm worried about the kids." He was so convincing, so earnest, that for a moment I almost doubted my own memories. Then I remembered the text about being a pathetic cow and felt nothing but disgust. "You're absolutely right," I said, watching confusion flicker across his face. "I think I do need help. In fact, I've already started getting it." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for January 8th. Dean walked into the Pima County Courthouse that morning with Harrison at his side, both men radiating confidence. Dean wore his best suit and that charming smile that had won me over 20 years ago. He nodded respectfully to the judge, played the role of the concerned husband perfectly. Then Victoria entered the courtroom. I watched Dean's face change as he recognized her. Not immediately, but with growing horror as Harrison whispered urgently in his ear. This was the attorney who dismantled Harrison's previous cases, the one he'd called impossible to intimidate. And she was representing me. Victoria approached the bench with a thick binder labeled Intent to Defraud and Coercive Control, Evidence Package A. She handed copies to the judge and opposing counsel with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Your Honor," Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "Before we address Mr. McLean's petition, there are some irregularities the court needs to see." Dean's confident smile began to fade as Victoria methodically presented his own evidence against him. The hidden financial accounts, the manipulative emails, the strategy sessions with Harrison, the fake receipts and manufactured incidents, and finally, the text messages. "Your Honor, I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit 15, where Mr. McLean refers to his wife as a pathetic cow and outlines his plan to leave her living in a trailer." The courtroom was dead silent. Dean's face went white, then red, then white again. Harrison looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Judge Patricia Morrison's expression grew colder with each piece of evidence. When Victoria finished her presentation, the judge looked directly at Dean. "Mr. McLean," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass, "would you care to explain these communications?" Dean's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Finally, he managed to stammer, "Wait, this isn't what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. Judge Morrison awarded me temporary custody of the children, temporary possession of the marital home, and froze all of Dean's hidden accounts pending investigation. She also ordered him to undergo a psychological evaluation and referred his case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Dean's carefully crafted exit strategy had become his own destruction. As we left the courthouse, I could hear him frantically arguing with Harrison in the hallway, his voice high with panic. The man who'd called me a pathetic cow was now facing perjury charges, contempt of court, and a federal audit of his finances. I walked out into the Arizona sunshine feeling lighter than I had in years. Katie and Ryan were safe in California with my sister. The house was mine, and for the first time in decades, I was truly free. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Dean lost custody, half the assets, and his reputation. He also faced criminal charges for fraud and money laundering. Harrison was sanctioned by the state bar and nearly lost his license. As for me, I kept my job at the veterinary clinic, sold the house in Tucson, and moved to a smaller place near Phoenix, where Victoria had offered me part-time work as a victim advocate. Katie and Ryan adjusted well to our new life, and I began to rebuild the relationships Dean had systematically destroyed. Looking back, I realized that Dean's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating me. It was documenting his cruelty so thoroughly that it became impossible to deny. His own words, preserved in digital amber, became the evidence that freed me from 18 years of manipulation and control. I often think about that Tuesday afternoon in October when I first saw that laptop message. The woman who found those files was still trapped in Dean's web of lies. The woman who walked out of that courthouse 6 months later was someone entirely different. Someone who remembered who she'd been before Dean convinced her to doubt everything about herself. The path to freedom had led through the darkest corners of betrayal, but it had taught me that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who inadvertently give us the tools to save ourselves.